It's been an exciting topic for me for these decades. I first read about parapsychology in J.B. Rhine's book, The Reach of the Mind. And then I was a student at Baylor then. I took this research in parapsychology to my Bible professors, and they thought it was heresy, and I took it to my science professors, and they thought it was humdrum, and that piqued my curiosity. Why are these two fields so opposed? And so we have science and religion. Man's quest for thousands of years has been this search for the truth. And in the olden days, it was philosophers such as the Greek philosophers and then the religionists. In the past 600 years or so, this quest has been more a matter of science and religion. And then in the 1800s, with Darwin and the 19th century mechanism, this took a turn in which science was very much atheistic. And more recently then, especially with the development of the New Age movement in the 1970s and the popularization of quantum mechanics, we've moved away from so much science and religion to a concern about science and consciousness, or science and spirituality. And the science that has intrigued both of us includes this field that is thought so little of now, which is parapsychology. And I know that this is part of what brought you into this field as well as myself. But let me ask you first, this talk about quantum mechanics and the popularization of it, dozens of books, do you feel that quantum mechanics really has something important to say about this question of science and spirituality?
Okay, I think it is a very important question. And most people think, most of the lay public think that it has a great deal to say. But the issue is more complex than that. The unstated assumption of science for the last 400 years has been that no human qualities of consciousness, intention, emotion, mind, or spirit can significantly influence a well-designed target experiment in physical reality. Our experiments of the last 10 or 12 years shows that that is absolutely in error in this present day and age. And quantum mechanics, its mathematical formalism, all right, has no place in it for human consciousness. Therefore, it can have no place with respect to parapsychology or psychology or psychiatry or anything to do with the human qualities that are so abundant within us. The issue is quantum mechanics is very good with things that are spatially and temporally dependent. That is, it was designed to work in space-time. The founding fathers, if they thought about it, they didn't choose to go beyond space-time. They did not choose to expand classical mechanics, classical science, to allow anything more than it was 400 years ago.
Well, the concept of entanglement, does that come out of quantum mechanics? And if so, doesn't entanglement relativize the time and space?
Well, the issue again is a complex one. Quantum mechanics has in it the aspect of entanglement, but it's the entanglement between atomic states, two atomic states that are created and moving in opposite directions. They are coupled, they are entangled, because you can perform an operation on one and you see an immediate change in the, no, not immediate, a very rapid change beyond our ability to measure something happening to the other one. Now, quantum mechanics functions in our macroscopic world at very low temperatures. You try to go beyond 2 degrees absolute, and the system evolves into classical mechanics. You try to increase the size of the object for entanglement from something of the order of an atom or a fundamental particle to the size of a cubic centimeter of material, and you start getting classical results. So entanglement is there in the formalism of today's quantum mechanics, but it's not the macroscopic entanglement that occurs at room temperature with things as large as this room over 6,000 miles.
So you would still use the word entanglement?
I'd use the word entanglement. It is entanglement. We see in psychoenergetic studies that experiments that have taken place in one locale can somehow induce complementary results in another locale 1,000, 6,000 miles away, and these spaces are large, and it's done at room temperature.
Now, does that have anything to do you think, with Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic resonance? Or some have thought of him as a breakthrough scientist. Is this relevant to your research?
It's very relevant. In fact, I had this same concept back in the 1970s, that it's like archetypes at the level of mind in the universe. But if we're talking about the level of mind, it is necessary to expand the frame of reference beyond space-time. That's the issue that comes in with psychoenergetic science. We must expand the frame of reference to go well beyond space-time into these higher dimensional structures, and to allow things to go faster than light. All of these very taboo in orthodox science, orthodox quantum mechanics.
Part of what I think orthodox science has built itself on is the notion of lawfulness. And for example, you hear preachers even today talk about divine intervention, that if something occurs contrary to what the physicist might say or the scientist might say, then God has put his laws aside. Now, you mentioned Edgar Cayce, that I've enjoyed studying so much. Cayce says, God is love, God is law, law is love. And he speaks frequently of immutable laws. There are laws that are eternal and immutable. And yet, to understand some phenomena, such as those that might occur in the Bible, a religious healing or something, scientists tend to say that couldn't happen because it's not lawful. But that's only in terms of their understanding of lawfulness, correct?
Yes. It is, traditional science is stuck. It's stuck in a space-time reference frame. They don't know how to really expand that reference frame to include these kinds of issues we're talking about. But I have found, following the path of psychoenergetic science, that if you allow consciousness to come in to the domain of experimental variables, then you begin to interact with higher dimensions of the universe. And you have to understand it, you have to go outside of space-time.
Well,
and let me just, before, I'd like to continue, because all of these things that you're talking about, I believe, are totally lawful. They're just lawful in higher dimensional frames of the universe. You have to expand. They're not lawful if you restrict yourself or constrain yourself to just space-time phenomena and electric atom-molecule phenomena. To me, we are all spirits having a physical experience as we ride the river of life together.
Now, that's all religions come down to that, basically.
Yep.
That's a universal agreement.
Right, so let me carry it forward. Our spiritual parents dressed us in these bio-body suits, put us in this playpen that we call a universe, in order to grow in coherence, in order to develop our gifts of intentionality, and in order to become what we're intended to become, co-creators with our spiritual parents. Now, if we look at the aspect of coherence, it is a type of ordering in the universe. But let's be clear about the potential that's involved there. If I take a simple light bulb, 60 watts, say, it gives some light, not a lot of light, mainly because the photons that come out of the light bulb are incoherent. And so there's a lot of cancellation. If we develop ourselves to the level of consciousness where we could make each photon come out coherent with the others, that is, as if they're riding on each other's back, then out of this same light bulb, you would have an energy density tens and hundreds and thousands of times the surface of the sun. That is the potential that existed in that light bulb. When you bring coherence into it, the potential expands amazingly. In our normal life, of course, we see this with lasers, but that's partially just the beginning. If we look at the business of intention, that's how we conduct our life. We're not aware of it. We do it subconsciously. We couldn't walk around. We couldn't do anything. We learn in school. We build our muscles. We intend to. We intend to hit a home run in a baseball game. We intend to have a dance with that lovely girl across the room on the dance floor. Ultimately, as we develop the coherence in ourselves and the ability to focus our intention, we will become what we were intended to become. We will spin planets and stars out of ourselves.
Yes.
That is the latent potential that is within us.
Well, Jesus said, if your eye be single, your whole body can be full of light.
Yes.
And what I've observed as a psychologist is not only the power of intentions, but the way in which we are our worst enemies because our intentions are in such conflict.
Yes.
We have no coherence. We have no focus.
We have been taught not to believe that we have this capacity. And it's because of the scientific dictum since the days of Descartes that we are not able to do these things.
An Olympic athlete, for example, is an illustration of one kind of what singleness of purpose can do. But these people spend years and years on this focused activity and accomplish amazing results.
If you keep on keeping on, you do accomplish amazing results. It's not quick.
Now, jokingly, it's said that Einstein said God doesn't throw dice. And I think in part that was his objection to quantum mechanics and the assumed unlawfulness of these particles at that level.
Yeah.
But the bigger picture is, I think some people think quantum mechanics is a key because they think it's an opening for free will or something. And so how do we work with determinants, of which psychologists are so interested in, hereditary determinants, environmental determinants, and on the other hand, the soul, free will. So I ask you as a scientist, help us step out of this deterministic box.
Yeah.
And how do we,
let's
what's the science of the soul, so to speak?
Okay, let me address that as I see it. First, let me go back again to quantum mechanics. There are really two key building blocks for quantum mechanics. One is the work of Max Planck at the end of the 1800s, that energy exchanges in matter is not a continuous, they're not continuous units of energy, but they are finite bits of energy and multiples of those finite bits. So that changed a lot of the mathematics. The second thing was the work of de Broglie, his particle pilot wave. He basically postulated that it wasn't just that there were particles that we dealt with in classical physics, but there were pilot waves as well. They were surrounding the particle. And we found evidence of that experimentally for wave motion aspects and particle motion aspects. And the dilemma is that the founding fathers cast the formalism in space-time. Now, it is really ludicrous to think that particles and waves are there together in space-time. We see waves, okay, but the waves we see cognitively are variations, modulations of particle density and particle flux density. Light is particle flux density, water waves is particle density. That's what wave motion is. And you can do it through matter, for sound waves, for example. But electromagnetic waves can go through vacuum. They're very different. Walter Harrison, a professor at Stanford in applied physics, wrote a book on applied quantum mechanics, and his statement was very clear. If you simultaneously accept the existence of particles and waves, you can create everything that's in quantum mechanics. All the mathematics, all of the stuff can come. That's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But the problem comes in when you put it in space-time. If you constrain it, all of this to be in just space-time, then you get weirdness of a magnificent order, which has fascinated people, and they think that's the way it is, and that therefore quantum mechanics does all these things that people think it does. And it doesn't. And the problem is if you go beyond space-time, and in my modeling I use a duplex space of two subspaces that are reciprocals to each other, one of which is space-time. One is perfect for particle, the other is perfect for wave. And when you do that, you can get what you want in terms of the conventional reality, but now it turns out from our experiments, human intention, the application of consciousness, works on the wave part that presently is in the physical vacuum. It doesn't work on the electric atom molecule level of reality.
Well, back in '29, Heisenberg came out with this principle of indeterminacy, saying you can't observe both the particle properties and the wave properties in the same experiment.
Yes.
And that led to some relativization of the objectivity of the observer.
Well, that's true.
How you set your experiment up. But what you're saying is the particle part relates to materialism.
Space-time.
And the wave part.
I also think of it as a material. I tend to think of physical reality as consisting of these two levels of substance. One which is coarse electric atom molecule stuff. The other is magnetic information wave stuff which functions in the physical vacuum. And it is, in terms of de Broglie, it is the wave in the vacuum, which appears to mathematics shows that it goes faster than light. It, in fact, is the wave that pulls the pilot wave of the de Broglie construct, because the pilot wave in the de Broglie particle pilot wave construct goes at the same velocity as the particle of light.
Tell me a little more about de Broglie now. What is the principle here?
The principle is that particles and waves are entangled. Let's put it that way. And the mathematics, if you leave out relativity, shows that it goes at the velocity. Well, even if you put in relativity, it goes at the velocity of the particle, the wave. So the wave is like a pilot wave. And we see experimentally both wave behavior and particle behavior, depending upon the design of the experiment. But if you look more deeply into the mathematics and you add the relativistic aspects, then you see that there is another wave which goes faster than the velocity of light. And it is the true guiding wave for the pilot wave which guides the particle. See, so the particle pilot wave are a construct in space-time part of the picture, but there is a higher dimensional wave, this one which I call the magnetic information wave, which goes faster than light, and with some other ingredient from my modeling is needed to allow it to be entangled with this particle pilot wave, and it moves it in the direction that it is truly to go.
Well, now, is this wave part that you're talking about the entry point for intention?
It's the entry point for intention, because in order for it to really operate, you have to bring another ingredient into the equation, and that is something I've called deltrons, which can go faster than light and slower than light.
So that's the interface.
That's the coupler.
The coupler.
That's the coupler, and that's crucial.
See, this has been the big problem, let's say in psychosomatic medicine or in parapsychology, starting with two kinds of stuff. There's spiritual stuff and material stuff.
Right.
How does the one affect the other? How does a prayer or an intention impact on matter, and what is the interface? And your concept is that the functioning of this, you call it a substance.
Yeah, I like to think of them all as substance. The finest substance is spirit. The coarsest substance is the electric atom molecule stuff.
All right. And that substance that's between these two areas these two frames that you talk about, that substance is the deltron. All right. Is intention part of emotion? How does that?
Intention needs to be given the thrust, the power of the intention comes from emotion. The intention, to me, the intention comes from the level of spirit in ourselves. It acts through the domain of mind, and it excites, activates deltrons in the domain of emotion, and they then become the coupler that allow all of these things to happen. They are the binding force, and they're basically, we could call them particles of consciousness. But if you give them your emotion, your consciousness, to back up the intention, then you've really got something.
Casey says thoughts are things.
Yes.
And so, in that sense, a thought is a particle of consciousness.
A thought is indeed a thing. To have it really be effective in the world, you've got to give it emotion.
All right. Let's take the flow then from the soul or the spirit or the pure, the highest part of our beingness into material expression. What are these steps? Now, Casey speaks of the oneness of all force, and then the next concept would be vibration. And then what are these step downs or interfaces of the energies to come into material, like a prayer that could heal someone?
Let me first talk about what I think of as the whole person. The whole person is really three selves. So think of a sphere. And the outer two layers of material of that sphere is what I call a personality self. Something we put on when we are born or incubated.
Now, that's your biophysical body?
That's the bio-body suit.
Yes.
And we take off when we appear to die, at least in space-time. I don't think we do, but die in the total sense, but we shuck off this bio-body suit. So that's the outermost envelope of this sphere. The median range is, and by the way, the first one, the bio-body suit, I call that the personality self. The median range is the soul self, and it's made of three levels of substance: the emotion domain substances, the mind domain substances, and an aspect of spirit domain substances. And that is what is evolving. And it evolves through putting on and taking off over long periods of what we call time, bio-body suits, personality selves. And it grows and acquires information because the personality self is perfect for interfacing with space-time. So space-time is the classroom, in essence. And so the information from the personality self eventually resides in the soul self. And when the soul self has acquired all the experience possible from this classroom, it is absorbed by the core of this domain, which is what I call the high spirit self or the God self, whichever word you like. But I think we are all three things, and they are coupled, they're entangled to some degree. And there's free will in the personality self. The soul self tries to work with the personality self and train it to the wisdom of the soul self, etc.
Let's talk about the science of that. For example, Gary Schwartz, more recently, 100 years of demonstrating, let's say, communication with the spirit plane.
Yes.
Or communication with those who's transitioned, the idea of there being something that can be studied scientifically.
Yes.
And then there are people like 𝐓𝐢𝐥𝐥𝐞𝐫'𝐬, a friend of yours, close friend, who might speak of a mobile center of consciousness. Mm-hmm. He can get out of his body
right.
and move. So these are researchable. You can do objective observations and experimental designs that that demonstrate that that your hypothesis that the soul has some measurable.
I tend to
has some measurable.
I tend to think so. I tend to think that indeed the unseen domain can be a very important and very empowering element in an experiment. The experiment, the way I see it, the simplest experiment, deals with, let's say, two people like us talking, and maybe an instrument to measure something. The conditioning of the space away from the normal level of reality, which I call the uncoupled level, to the coupled level of reality, where you activate consciousness, and the unseen. And the unseen can play a part or not, as it chooses. I've had many, many, many experiences with the unseen. The aspects of healing, it can come many, many ways. The unseen appears to help. Certainly in our experiments, the psychoenergetic experiments, what we do is we imprint a specific intention into a little electronic box. And then that box is a host for the consciousness of that intention and the specifics of that intention. And we put it in a room where experiment is being run, and appropriate experiment, and we just switch it on and watch over time the change in the direction of the property measurement towards the direction of the specific intention. And it can be to increase the magnitude of something or decrease the magnitude of something. And in this process of imprinting, we do it from a deep meditative state, and it feels to us very much connected to the unseen. And that the unseen does the heavy work in the experiment. Certainly if you ask a really good healer how they're able to do what they do, generally they will say, I don't particularly do anything. I just tune in to my inner self and I let myself get out of the way, and it flows through. The universe allows it to flow through. There's
a story in the Bible. It said the Apostle Paul was healing, and there was a point where they took handkerchiefs or aprons that he had touched, and they would take them to other places and they would heal. And then more recently, you're familiar with the research of Dolores Krieger,
yes.
Columbia University nurse and PhD, her therapeutic touch. Mm-hmm. She did some research with cotton swabs, yeah. in which the cotton seems to carry
right.
a healing energy. Now, is that the same?
That's the same kind of thing.
Embedding this material with intention.
We could do it with your shirt, except it wouldn't be as good a scientific object. I wouldn't be able to get the kind of information that I want to get from that. It would say, yes, you can do that, and that we can cause these things to happen.
Well, let me go really far out, yeah. then with you. if intention can impact on material objects,
Yes.
and then you can take it somewhere else and has an effect, will it help if I pray for my automobile? Is it helpful if I pray over my food? Can I embed my food with intention that will bring more coherence into my
Absolutely.
my system?
It's a question of degree, and it's a question of building the infrastructure into oneself to be able to do this. This is part of becoming coherent, to not just have infrastructure in our electric atom molecule body, which we develop with our going to school and all these things in this domain, but to build the inner levels of self, put the infrastructure in there, and with that infrastructure, and learning how to intend effectively and sustain that intention, we can do all these things. And as Jesus said, what I do, you can do also, and more so.
Well, you mentioned the importance of emotion and intention.
Yes.
And we take, say, the endocrine system,
Yeah.
and the concept of spiritual centers or chakras.
Yeah.
Each of these are related to a different quality of emotion. Now, I know your work features speaking both of the acupuncture meridians and of the chakras.
Mm-hmm.
At what level of the soul moving into material expression do these
Okay.
bio-body...
In my present modeling, let's say my working hypotheses, because I can have a working hypothesis and I have a working model with all these dimensions. Until I can prove them, of course, I can't really call it good science. But you have to have a target, and I have a target. And we have shown unequivocally that for inorganic, organic, and living systems, that intention can change the properties of those materials in really statistically significant ways. So there's no doubt in my mind with these experiments. We have proven that the old adage from the days of Descartes is quite wrong in today's world. The issues, I think, they are complex, but you have to develop the infrastructure, just as any athlete would if he wants to, let's say he's runs the low hurdles and wants to run the high hurdles. He doesn't if he's wise, he doesn't immediately try to run the high hurdles. He just keeps lifting the bar bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit, until he can do it. So that's the way we have to go. And so as we do, to explain these phenomena, we have to expand science.
What you're doing is science. You're doing
Yes.
scientific experiments,
Yes.
but it's not well accepted because of a consciousness or an investment. We've called it a vested interest thing in the atheistic or materialistic sciences.
It's a dilemma.
So
Yeah.
what is it that holds, what is this inertia, or we've talked a little about vested interest, not only money, but pride and reputation.
Peer review. Let's go back to Galileo's day. The priests of that time would not look through the telescope at the experimental data
It's that simple,
because
isn't it?
because they had developed such hubris that they knew what was the right answer. They didn't have to look at the data in their view, and they were totally wrong. The issue is the same today. So humans tend to develop, when they get in positions of great respect, they tend to develop hubris. And that hubris blinds them.
And it passes for being a real scientist.
Yes, it passes because they have the political power, in essence, and they make the game their game.
I was on a tour with a group in Mexico, and at the hotel we're staying one night, there was another group, and there was a British physicist there. And some of my group wanted me to talk with him. And so we met, and the subject of parapsychology came up, and he said there's nothing to it. And I said, well, there are several scientific journals that publish objective research on their findings. And I said, have you ever picked up or read a single article of this? And he said, no, I don't have to. I know it's nonsense anyway.
Exactly. That's my point.
So the unwillingness to look at data obtained by the scientific method,
yes,
is rejected because of this.
Because they can't explain it from their own paradigm. And therefore, it will tend to psychologically weaken them, they feel. And they will lose face with their peer group, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And your point about Galileo and the telescope, this is a quality of human nature.
I think it is.
That has been pulling us away from the search for the truth repeatedly. And I think as much in science as in religion and religious leaders, the whole vested interest, I call it preferred ignorance. It's as though I do not want to look through your telescope because I prefer to stay
I'm comfortable. I mean, they don't say it, but I'm comfortable with this particular paradigm, and I'm so comfortable I don't need to look further, which is too bad, because the people that are suffering are really the general public in the world, because we desperately need to come to this aspect that is central to us, our consciousness, our emotions, our thoughts.
Consciousness. Carl Jung, great Swiss psychologist, said consciousness is a precondition of being.
Yes.
He also said we can no longer practice any psychology that ignores the findings of parapsychology.
Yes.
And then he said, because these relativize our understandings of time and space. Take the precognitive dream, for example.
Sure.
Aristotle even addresses that, and it's typically pushed off as anecdotal, even in the spite of amazing evidence.
And that occurs because of the model that science uses. It does not, it's not large enough to contain it. My view, my personal view, my working hypothesis, let's put it that way, is that we don't know what consciousness is. So that's one of the difficulties. Of course, we don't know what an electron is either. We don't know what time is either, et cetera, but we can still use them. Consciousness, we would probably all agree, it manipulates information. And that becomes very important. And it doesn't matter whether it's letters of an alphabet, numbers, jigsaw puzzles, mathematical symbols. Basically, they all get manipulated by consciousness. So if we focus on the information first, then we begin to see that if you have a process in nature which increases the information content, then mathematically we know that that reduces the thermodynamic entropy, which means it restores potential to the universe. Whereas most processes, not involving consciousness, they all increase the entropy, which degrades the potential of the universe. So consciousness is terribly, terribly important. As I said, my working hypothesis is that consciousness is a byproduct or an emergent property of spirit entering dense matter. And so what is necessary here is that we build information into ourselves in the form of infrastructure. And we build it at the various levels of self. And the more infrastructure we build into ourself, then the more consciousness can enter, because it seems to need infrastructure to attach to. So that's the working hypothesis at this point.
And contrary, the materialistic scientific view has been that consciousness is what they call an epiphenomenon of life. And this whole assumption say the atheistic assumption, appeals to natural law, and what you wind up...
Natural space-time law.
Yes. And you wind up saying, if you assume lawfulness, then the whole universe is accidentally lawful.
Yes, if you restrict yourself to that constraint of just space-time data.
And that's a contradiction, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
How can you assume lawfulness and say, but it runs out down there?
Yeah. Right.
It's all just a cosmic accident.
Well,
and yet, you know, Stephen Hawking,
Yeah.
thought by some to have the intellect of Einstein, in his book, Short History of the Universe, says, from the moment of the Big Bang, everything was determined. This whole deterministic notion is all... That's all you can get out of the thoroughgoing materialism.
But this is the problem. And I would suspect that in the days of Galileo, the priests were thinking of writing books about the theory of everything. And we know in today's world, many scientists, many physicists, chemists, etc., they are writing books about the theory of everything. Well, you cannot write about the theory of everything if you don't take consciousness into account, if you don't take emotions into account, if you don't take thought into account. I mean, we know we're working with these things all the time. And so you can't, this is the problem. This is the problem that comes from the hubris, that this is all there is, and therefore I can go ahead and do this. Well, to me, we are just babes crawling across the floor of the universe. We have hardly begun the great adventure.
Well, with this assumption of this idea of the soul and that we are babes, you have a strong commitment to doing science.
Yes.
In the conventional scientific controlled environment, controlled experiment,
Right.
gathering data, demonstrating data.
Yes.
What, in terms of your spirituality, why are you so invested in coming up with these scientifically based demonstrations?
Well, basically the reason I started this over the last decade, this group of experiments with these intention host devices, was to seriously test this unstated assumption that has been around since the days of Descartes. I mean, scientists take it as a given. And our experiments show it is absolutely not a given, and it is the doorway of hope to an amazing future. I mean, my goodness, it says that there is so much out there, even just in the next level of reality, this one that normally is uncoupled with respect to our electric atom molecule world. And it will influence everything we do, whether you're talking about science, whether you're talking about technology, whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about business. The possibilities that it opens up can enhance every technology that exists in the world today, and can enhance our understanding of ourselves and how to become more, how to build ourselves by working with our intentions and learn how to be effective intenders so that we can move from being a normal individual to becoming an adept, to becoming a master, and eventually to becoming an avatar. These are all steps on our pathway to becoming a co-creator with our spiritual parents. We have a very long way to go. The potential is beyond imagining. The energy potential that's latent in the physical vacuum, as determined by people like John Wheeler and David Bohm and many other individuals who are no longer with us, but who calculate what is required to be in the physical vacuum in order to have quantum mechanics and relativity theory to be internally self-consistent. These numbers came out to be something like 10 to the 94 grams equivalent of energy per cubic centimeter, with each gram, using Einstein's equation of E equals mc squared. Now, you can make a sum to look at this. You can say, let's take the average matter density electric atom molecule matter density in the universe. Astronomers can tell us what that is. So we have a number. And you multiply that by the volume of the universe, 15 billion light years radius, and you get a number, okay? And now, on the other hand, if you take a single hydrogen atom, mostly empty space, so you take the volume of that space and you multiply it by the 10 to the 94 grams per cc, and you find that you get another number. And this number is millions of times greater than that number. So it says that even in that infinitesimal amount of vacuum, there is more latent energy potential than all the mass in all the planets and all the stars and all the interspaces between heavenly bodies out to as far as we can see with our telescopes.
The Tibetans have a notion of the void, but
Yes.
they say the void is not empty. Now,
Yeah.
what is this vacuum you're talking about,
The
and how does
yeah.
it relate to
This is the physical vacuum. Okay, the physical vacuum is just absence of electric atom molecule particles.
But is it populated with
It's populated by antimatter and matter.
and
I mean,
what
that
about
was-
dark matter and dark energy?
Well,
is that part of this?
It's all part of it. But okay, Dirac was the first one to say, where does an electron come from? And he said it comes from the negative energy sea in the physical vacuum. And when there's nothing there, in essence, or at least in our environment, he postulated that a cosmic ray would come through the vacuum and it would excite the generation of an electron and an anti-electron, okay? That is out of nothing in the form of matter, but just adding sufficient energy, you could make an electron. And then with another energy, you can make a proton. With another energy, et cetera, you make neutrons. And before you know it, it's materialization by that source. He was able to calculate the energy of the electron when he did this back in about 1931, 31, 99.9% correct. Physicists didn't like it. He left out a particular piece in the calculation of sort of self-energy for the photon, and anyway, I won't go into the details, but they can't grasp the concept of negative energy. They can understand positive energy, etc. They work with it for such a long time. So they basically have not, although Dirac won the Nobel Prize for this because antimatter was discovered a few years after he postulated it, they don't like his model for the reason I mentioned. But you know, so much of what he said was correct, and I have expanded his model to include in this duplex space, this next level, this reciprocal subspace, which, by the way, is a frequency domain. 1 over distance is a number per unit distance, which means a spatial frequency. 1 over time is number per unit time, which is a temporal frequency. So in essence, the reciprocal space part is a frequency domain, which means it's everywhere and every when, which is very interesting for non-locality, very interesting for long-range entanglement, spatial entanglement, and also time entanglement. And we see both of those in our experimental data.